Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Uganda records a 40% surge in cases of malaria. The disease is at epidemic proportions and is the top killer of under 5s in the country. The spike's been put down to several factors, including climate change. We hear from our correspondent in the country. Also, despite over 1,000 troops having been sent in last month to one of the most dangerous neighbourhoods of South Africa, dozens of people were killed in Cape Flats last weekend. People living there say it'll take more than soldiers to tackle the crime and gangs that have taken over. And parts of Togo lose up to 10 metres of coast a year to man-made erosion. The damage is not just to the environment, but also the livelihoods of fishing communities. We take a closer look. But first, days after the World Health Organization warned that malaria in Burundi was at epidemic proportions, with almost half of the country currently infected, nearby Uganda's reported that over the last year there's been a 40% spike in cases of the deadly disease. It's currently the leading cause of death for hospital patients under 5. Grania Harrington is in Kampala and she joins us now with more. Grania, so what more can you tell us about that huge jump in numbers of cases of malaria that we've seen in Uganda?
So, yeah, as you said, there's a considerable spike this year. It's estimated that around half the country is affected, with over 400,000 cases increase as opposed to this time last year. So that's been blamed on climate change, or at least changing weather patterns, with the rains lasting longer than usual this year and a different distribution of rain, meaning that different areas have been affected maybe in unexpected ways. There's also been an influx of refugees. Uganda has over 1 million refugees. That influx has been continuing for years, and that, along with a growing population, has been blamed also for that rise in numbers. Now, also because of these changing weather patterns, there are places like Kampala which traditionally have a low prevalence of malaria, and the Health Ministry says that people are less likely to take the standard precautions in these areas, the most important of which is sleeping under a mosquito net. And as you said, it is still the main cause of death in the country, but those numbers do have to be taken in context. So, for example, a decade ago, the prevalence of malaria was at 42% in Uganda. Now, that has dropped to around 9% now. So the Health Ministry is also emphasising that while there's a spike at the moment, overall great progress has been made in the fight against malaria here.
So what is the government going to do to try and get those numbers down?
Well, the Health Minister had a news conference this morning where she really urged people to take those precautions, sleeping under a mosquito net, getting treatment as soon as symptoms appear, which is very important, but also things like moving sources of stagnant water where mosquitoes will breed from around households. Now, the government has made a huge effort. So, for example, in 2017-2018, around 27 million mosquito nets were distributed throughout the country. The aim was to have one for every 2 people in every household throughout the country. And they say another one of those master distributions will be taking place early next year. But for the moment, for this current spike, all they can do with the changing weather patterns, they say there are certain things that are not under their control. And so the most important thing for the moment is to reduce the impact, and that is focused on reducing mortality. But with a healthcare system that's generally under strain in this country, that will be a little bit harder, particularly in rural areas of Uganda.
Thanks very much. Grania Harrington there for us in Kampala. Well, nearly 3/4 of would-be candidates in Tunisia's upcoming presidential elections have been rejected. Around 100 people put their names up for next month's poll. The election committee's greenlit 26. The vote was brought forward from November following the death of President Beji Caid Essebsi in July. The final list isn't due until the end of the month, and the number of hopefuls could still go up. Amongst those certain to be running are Prime Minister Youssef Chahed and his Defence Minister Abdelkrim Zbidi, who resigned to throw his hat in the ring. At least 6 people have been killed in heavy flooding in Sudan. At least 12 provinces have been affected by heavy rains that began earlier this month, and thousands of people have been left homeless. About 1,300 houses in Khartoum have been damaged or destroyed. Power outages have also hit parts of Jazeera province. Soldiers have been deployed to help in the response to the extreme weather. And protest leaders in Sudan are calling on military authorities to stop painting over murals and slogans that sprung up during the demonstrations that led to the ousting of former President Omar al-Bashir in April. The walls of the army headquarters, where protesters held a weeks-long sit-in calling for Bashir's exit and then for the handover to civilian rule, were covered in graffiti, much of it depicting the faces of those killed during the uprising. Well, last month, 1,300 South African soldiers were sent into a notorious crime-ridden area around Cape Town. Despite the troops backing up police, last weekend, 47 people were killed in Cape Flax. It's one of the most dangerous neighbourhoods in the country, and locals say that the problem can't be solved by the army alone. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
An apartment is raided in the area of Cape Flats. It's on the outskirts of the popular tourist destination of Cape Town. This is where black and mixed-race people were sent to live during apartheid. Last weekend, 47 people were killed by rival gangs in Cape Flats. This happened despite the fact that 1,300 soldiers have been sent to the district since last month. Sally Ann Jacobs' 19-year-old cousin was killed by a gang.
They just killed him for nothing and told me that it was a mistaken identity. 2018, they killed my 15-year-old son, which I believe that it was because he was a witness who killed my cousin. That's why they killed my son.
Last year, the police recorded more than 2,800 murders in Cape Town. Only the most violent cities in Latin America have a higher homicide rate. The presence of the army means schools can open and ambulances can circulate. But locals say it won't solve structural problems like high unemployment.
A full program on how to maintain a good social cohesion in the area needs to be pieced together, and that needs to be done with the people, with consultation with the community. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Gangs traffic in drugs and illicit goods, but the tensions are also driven by the availability of weapons. They are often bought from corrupt officials. In 2016, one veteran police officer was convicted of illegally selling 2,000 firearms. Most of them ended up here in Cape Flats.
Well, every year in Togo, the sea nibbles away several more metres of coastline. Man-made erosion isn't just eating away at the country's shores, but is also consuming infrastructure and devastating the livelihoods of fishing communities. Take a look.
Along Togo's coast, just east of the capital Lomé, villagers are feeling the devastation of sea level rise. Only the remains of this fishing village are left standing. Kojo and his family had to leave their fisherman's cabin when the water began to rise.
The house, everything, there's nothing left. We're here suffering. We are suffering. I don't know where we're going to be able to stay right now.
The sea reclaims up to 10 meters of land on this coast every year. Entire communities have been forced to flee. In Bagida, 500 people made a living from fishing. They have not received any government assistance to relocate or rebuild.
We have no way of finding the money to rebuild our house.
A glance towards the horizon reveals a likely culprit for the coastal erosion, the constant stream of gigantic cargo ships in and out of the port of Lomé. Locals allege that after the port's construction in 1967, the sea level began to rise.
The main reason for the erosion is the infrastructure of the port along the coast that disrupts sediment transit.
This dike in the harbor blocks the sand currents that would otherwise build up the coast. Global warming is also accelerating the erosion.
Climate change, with its warming effect on the planet due to melting glaciers and rising seawater temperatures, is an aggravating factor in coastal erosion.
In all, 3,000 people have been displaced by the rising sea level. Several hundred others are awaiting their fate, anxiously watching the waters.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.